Unspoken Issues.
All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode. We are back because we are in the midst of the continuing saga of Transformers Generation 2. And the three you heard on the previous episode have come back to discuss the second half of this epic storyline. So I am Jesse Starcher, and I am, of course, joined by Dean Compton. Dean Compton, are you ready to talk some Transformers Generation 2 tonight?
I was ready to talk Transformers Generation 2 tonight, 6 months before I was born. There weren't even Transformers, but I was ready. I knew what was coming. I'm the Dr. Manhattan of Transformers.
That's crazy. Well, all right then. Darry Weight, how about you, buddy? Are you ready to jump into the second half and finish this epic saga out?
I am. I'm very excited for this half, and I don't know if I would say I'm the Silk Spectre of Transformers, because I don't know if I want to make out with Dean.
Well, there's some fan fiction for you, ladies and gentlemen. That sounds like it's going to be a lot of fun.
I would make out with me.
All right. All right. Well, hey, we'll pick it up where we left off, getting into the synopsis here. That synopsis is right around the corner, but first let me tell you about Amazon Music. You may not be able to find Starscream's crooning country album, King of My Own Castle, but you will be able to find the Cybertronic Spree's rockin' good time tune, Cybertronic Warrior. If you head to getamazonmusic.com/W2M Network, you can get a free 30-day trial where you can check out over 70 million songs. That's getamazonmusic.com/W, the number 2M Network, for that free 30-day trial. Hey everybody, just wanted to step in here real quick and give the credits for issues 7 through 12 of Transformers Generation 2. Written by Simon Furman, credited as the artist for some stories is Derek Ganager and also Jeff Sr. Pencils by Manny Galan, inks by Jim Amash, lettered by Starkings, O'Neill, and Comicraft, and colors are Sarah Massoff. While pillaging a moon for some reanimum gas, the scout ship returns with barely enough time to tell Megatron that Jyaxus destroyed most of their party before blowing completely out of the sky. Enraged, Megatron and his forces face off with Jyaxus and his army, but are easily defeated. Megatron's attempt at fighting Jyaxus one-on-one results in them being nearly destroyed and sent crashing to a planet below. When Megatron's Decepticons find him, he makes a decision to form an alliance with his adversaries, Optimus Prime and the Autobots. As the uneasy union between Megatron and Optimus is getting settled, a distress call comes in from a planet called Ethos, as all life on the planet is apparently getting wiped out. Prime says they must check it out. Megatron, I don't feel like we should be wasting our time doing that, and he hangs back. On Ethos, Prime sees the destruction Jyaxus' forces have wrought and again wonders about their creator's plan to limit the Transformers' growth because they would grow beyond compassion and morality. That was discussed in the previous episode. There's a lot of, what would be the word? Like it almost feels like kind of a mythology for the Transformers. Does that sound good, Dean?
Yeah, that's precisely correct. This is the Transformers. Not just mythology, but like how they came to be and how these creation myths, if you will, evolved. And yeah, certainly it's funny to think that like, oh wow, they finally evolved beyond morality. I mean, have you met Shockwave? You know what I mean? Like this guy has no morality. Now they've done it. It seems like a decide, and I think this is touched upon. They got to the point where like they were evolving past morality, so they had to stop because the Decepticons were already so immoral. But yeah, this isn't just their creation myth. These are their creation facts, as I understand them, Darry.
This is so crazy because, you watch the cartoons, you watch the movies, you watch everything else, and you don't think there's an Old Testament creation myth underpinning all this. But then you get this guy, Simon Furman, who wrote the majority of the issues. And he's like, no, we're going to retell the creation of the universe using these Japanese toys. And I love it because he never gives up. He's the one who originally introduced Primus. He made something different out of Unicron. He really enforced these metaphysical themes and concepts that had no place in this stuff. And he's still doing it here. And the difference is that here it almost works because it's like, I'm going to introduce a threat that comes from you that's so bad and so awful that if you don't get your stuff together and realize there's something bigger than you, there's not going to be anything left. So it's this beautiful morality play, but it's the toys. It's all the plastic stuff I got in the display case behind me.
number one, also, the citizens of the planet Ethos are getting wiped out. That's pretty subtle right there, like interesting. Number two, I think, and I would love, maybe one day we can get Simon Furman to talk to us about this, but I think part of it is, like, you talk about, when you look at the way he approached it, I think, and I love Bob Budiansky, and I love what Jim Shooter did, and even, Denny O'Neil had some contributions to the Transformers mythology, but they were definitely like, okay, this is something that we're building for some clients who have asked us to do so. I think in Furman's case, I'm not saying he didn't know he's like, I didn't even know there were toys. I don't think that's the case, but I don't think he approached it that way. Yeah. I think he approached it more as like, somebody has started like building a railroad line, and we've got a few stops here at the start, but this railroad line can stretch infinitely, and I can put whatever stops as it, that I want as it goes, and it can even branch off. There could be multiple stops, multiple lines, because he didn't see it as fulfilling the need for a client. He saw it as utilizing existing characters to build a mythology that, I don't want to say had been ignored, but just wasn't important in regard to the work that had come prior.
Yeah, and to his credit, to Simon Furman's credit, he did a pretty good job, because
I totally agree.
Yeah, as far as I know, he's still connected with the mythology. I mean, most people, especially in comic books, can't say they've been working on the same property for decades since their inception. I mean, even Stan Lee eventually left Fantastic Four and Spider-Man. But as far as I know, Simon Furman is still working on stories, doing stuff involved in the community. And it's like, hey, man, this is great. I mean, I know in the down period when Beast Wars was very popular, he had all these ideas of where he wanted stuff to go, and people would invite him to conventions and talk to him and say, hey, Simon, what was the plan here? And be like, well, let me tell you what it is. And now that, we've had a bit of a resurgence in Transformers as this evergreen property, which I love, he's kind of been able to tell these stories. So yeah, to Dean's point, it's like he put in the legwork, but it's paid off, and I'm quite happy to keep supporting him.
When you talk about the Marvel universe, like, the conversation is going to like start and end with, Lee and Kirby. When it's Transformers, I feel like the name that comes up, it starts and ends with Simon Furman. Even if he didn't create them, he's the guy who has really cemented them on multiple levels, because he's helped with the video games. He's done the comic books. I think he's worked on some prose novels. He's like an advisor to the films. He's the guy who has stamped every possible way that you can, to the point where, like, it's funny, he starts working on the comics because of the toys, and now he's somebody who they ask about to make toys. So I think that his name is the one. It starts and ends there. A lot of other people done a lot of great things, but yeah, it's hard for me to believe. And he pulls it off, like you said. You're reading this stuff and you're watching this, essentially, like you said, Old Testament morality play, and it works. Jesse, you don't know as much about these characters as we do, obviously. So, how does it work for you? Were you kind of feeling that same Old Testament cosmic charity to the gods type stuff here, or was it just, man, those robots, they've got guns.
them crazy robots. No,
look at that war world. Not even Brady's war world, but different.
I love this aspect of the creation and what's come after these Optimus Prime. Like I said, I got a good baseline of Transformers by watching the cartoon and knowing what happened in the movie and all that. But this adds that extra layer to it, which to me it makes it that much more interesting. I really do like knowing the fact that we talked about this last episode, that Prime feels like he's confused. He doesn't know what's going on. Imagine if we were all of a sudden just given that revelation that Prime has, like, okay, our world, well, in some sense, maybe it has, but, humanity could probably run amok, and given the right tools, it could take over the universe. But just because that's the way we are.
Could destroy the world.
I think we're in the process of doing so, but that's going to weigh heavy on somebody. And that definitely weighs heavy on Optimus here, that he's kind of confused. He's trying to figure out what to do. Plus, he knows that, shit's about to hit the fan with this swarm and these visions that he's having. He shows up on Ethos. He sees what Jyaxis is doing. They're still wiping out planets. The Autobots are with Prime. They find the invading army that's going through Ethos, and they engage with them. As they realize that the battle's not going their way, lo and behold, Megatron and his troops show up. They teleport in to sway the tide of battle, helping Prime defeat Jyaxis' troops. Sometime later, Prime and Megatron's team team land on a moon called Jasik and discover it has been ravaged from all life and matter, nearly stripped away, leaving lifeless husks. Taking some of the material left behind on Jasik back to Earth, the Autobot team examines it to find that it is very similar or identical to Cybertronian genetics. Prime lets the others in on his visions. Hey guys, this is what I've been seeing. And his revelation that all Cybertronians could create new life, but their race had forgotten this was something that they could do. But Jyaxus has rediscovered it and just continued to do so over and over, leading to a separation of any morality.
Well, one thing I got to point out that you mentioned, and I'm happy you were because it was my biggest note, that someone introduced the idea of transformer genetics.
Yes.
Like, I know I know superhero comics play fast and loose with science, but when I read that the first time, and I was like, all right, you know what, that's fun. And then I was reading it the second time, I was like, no, that's complete nonsense. Like the idea that a giant 18-wheeler that turns into a robot has a genetic code is so funny to me, because it's again this idea, like Dean was saying before, where it was like Simon has a story he wants to tell, and he's not going to let the fact that it's someone else's property stop him from doing that. So we have this whole thing where literally a DNA spiral is drawn into the comic.
Oh yeah,
we have the same genetic structure as us, and I'm just sitting here laughing because I'm like, I don't think you guys have DNA, but again, I'm glad you're running with it.
I could understand it maybe to a point of like, okay, we got to sort of humanize them somehow. I mean, these are obviously big robots, and if they got genetics, if they got genes, okay, fine, that sounds good. I mean, we're in the 90s here. I'm sure fringe science and genetics is probably a buzzword going on around then at that point. But yeah, I could see where you'd find it. It's just like, what in the world?
I mean, it was going around at the time. But I think, for me, it's funny when I read that. At first, I thought the same thing. I was like, that's silly. But then I was like, we accept that Transformers are alive. Yeah. We accept that they're like sentient beings like us. And I wonder on some level if, and this is me, maybe getting a little meta, but I wonder if like we read it that way because that's the way we would understand it. And that's not exactly what it is, but like that's the closest that we could possibly come to comprehending this, because it makes sense that there's some kind of sentient beings that have some equivalent of a genetic code, especially if they've decided that like, that they lost their way to reproduce. Well, all of them are pretty similar, but at the same time, they don't die like us. So, I guess on some level, maybe it doesn't make sense. But for me, I was just like, that's just the closest we can come to understanding it. Listen, I trust Wheeljack, I trust Perceptor, I trust the science team. That's what I'm saying. They're the science team. Just like I trust science in real life. I got the vaccine. Perceptor said this is good. I'm in. Way to go, scientists.
It's funny, too, because I at no point was like, oh, I don't buy this or I don't accept it. It was just like, I love that they're leaving nothing on the field. It's like, we need a story where suddenly Transformers have DNA. We're running with it. And I'm like, great, I am on this train. I am sitting in my seat until the end. But the other thing it made me think of, and I don't know, I'm sure Dean has read it, Jesse, I'm not sure if you have, but in the very first Transformers comic, they actually say, before Primus had been introduced, Bob Budiansky wrote the script that actually says that on the planet Cybertron, life evolved from like gears and levers and things like that. So that was the first place my mind went, of saying like, I doubt this is what Simon intended. And again, I don't know him. I'm just calling him Simon for shorthand. But like, if you were to go back and connect this, almost the last issue of the classic comic to the first one and saying, well, maybe we did evolve on Cybertron and now we're going to have to deal with our evolutionary descendants. For me, it was just like, oh, okay, it's a nice symmetry to the whole thing.
Can you imagine like the lever or gear guppy crawling out of like the freaking cyber ocean on Cybertron, like evolving, like, oh, I guess I'll get on land, like it happened here.
It comes out of the sea of rust, and it's
right. It just comes out, and then it's like, whoa. What if I was also a car? What if I was a car too? You know what I mean? Listen, it's not a bad idea. I also think sometimes, what if I was a car too?
Oh, yeah.
So, it's not a bad idea. Way to go. Yeah, Transformers Evolution. You're right. I hadn't thought about that in a while, but that is an issue 1. And it does kind of bring it all, brings it all back home, almost Bob Dylan style.
This is my first side note. During all of this, on a planet called Karn, Jyaxus' troops are again exterminating life, but they are completely overtaken by a black swarm that kills them all. Mindset leads the away team on Karn and is one of the last to face the swarm and watches as the swarm becomes a gigantic being and then proceeds to eat them. This sets off some sympathetic pains in Onslaught, who is on board Warworld. So, okay, Mindset is a Combaticon. Am I correct?
Those were G-Axis' forces. I don't...
Oh, no, you're right. Mindset is G-Axis. He's not a Combaticon.
Yeah, he's not a Combaticon. No,
okay.
I think the connection that you're supposed to get is like, since he transformed into like, I don't know, some weird truck missile bay thing, that's kind of what the Combaticons did. So I thought that like he could feel it because they're that connected. I didn't get what it was exactly. That's what I thought it was. You got it figured out, Darry.
It doesn't make a lot of sense to me, so I'm going to say this, but this is not me saying, hey, this makes a lot of sense to me. I just think what's going on. I think what's supposed to be going on is like Onslaught birthed one of these Cybertronians eons ago, doesn't remember it, and it's almost like, hey, my kid got knocked off and I can feel a phantom pain.
Okay, that makes sense.
No. It makes sense within the context of Generation 2. My only thing, and again, I'm just nitpicking here, but I think Onslaught and the Combaticons were created on Earth. So that would have been after they left Cybertron originally. But again, that's just a real nitpick here. And I don't know the comic continuity as good as well as I do the cartoon one. So I could be wrong.
Well, Dean looks like he's thinking.
I mean, it was both, right? Like I thought they used, it was like personality chips from Cybertron that they put into like, that they utilized on Earth vehicles.
See, there we go.
All I saw was like, okay, I see Mindset like get eaten, and then you see Onslaught like, oh, my stomach hurts. I'm like, he bends over, and I'm like, there's some kind of sympathetic pain here of some sort or something, and I didn't understand the relation between the two. I thought that they were both like of the same. They were both Combaticons or something. I don't know where I got that from, but I thought maybe
because it Blastoff talks to him. It says they're both Combaticons in the panel, so you might have put all that together. And that I speak to one of my biggest, probably one of my biggest nitpicks about Transformers Generation 2. There's no combination. Like we never see Devastator, we never see Bruticus, we never see Defensor, we never see Superion, we never see Computron, we never see Minosaur, but we see a lot of their individual guys, and I just don't know why. Because to me, that's one of the most fun and coolest things about the Transformers, and it also makes sense why you would think that Mindset would have been a part of them. Also, Mindset's one of the only named of G-Axis.
Yeah.
Like most of them don't have a name. Like so
like
I can see how you would think that. But like that's one of my biggest gripes is we see the Combaticons, we see them in mass at some point. They're like going to team up to fight Starscream, but we don't see them turn into Bruticus and whip his ass. Yeah, I mean, like we don't see anything like that. So I wonder why that is. I wonder why they chose not to use the combining stuff here. Because I feel like we missed something without it. It's an important part of Transformers to me.
Do you have a favorite combiner?
Wow, that's tough, man. That's a real tough one. They're all so cool. I think my favorite is probably Bruticus, because when I was growing up, I was a big World War II mark.
Oh,
and
nice.
so like a lot of his, except for like, Vortex, they're kind of all based on, and I guess Blastoff as well, but like, there's a tank, there's that guy. I also love Defensor, a big fan of Defensor, because, like Colossus is like one of my favorite X-Men. I like the people who are like, I'm big and strong and I protect. Yeah. So it's probably those two with, special asterisk to Devastator, because everybody loves Devastator. It's just a rule. Who's your favorite combiner, Darry?
I have a soft spot. I couldn't tell you why, but for Piranaconn.
Oh, Piranacon's amazing.
Yeah, the combined form of the Seacons. I love that. I don't know why, but he's got a fancy helmet, and he always looks kind of like something that would fight Godzilla. Yes. And I loved the Seacons, all the animals and stuff. I must have had them. They must have been released right at the good time for me to have them. But even now, today, I'll bring him up, and a lot of people will be like, what are you talking about? Because I don't know that he ever made it into the American one. But yeah, he is my favorite. He's definitely on the short list of like, I got to get another tattoo. It's going to be this random fish robot from Japan.
I also I can't remember what they combine into, but they fight Computron. It's like the Terragons.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I can't remember the name of and I feel I'm like, take my badge, I'm off the force, because I can't remember the name. But it was like genuinely scary. Like, it looked bad. Not a big Predacons guy. Just, okay.
Yeah, no, Predacons are rough only because I love the Beast Wars ones so much, but the Terracons are exciting because they combine into Abominus.
Abominus, that's his name.
They might be in the next movie. I was reading something that
how about that?
Yeah, that Transformers, 7 or whatever we're up to is going to have the Beast Wars characters, but it's going to feature a third faction, and it might be the Terracons. So I'm like, I am on board with that.
I can't. No combiners. Try not to get too far off track. Sorry, y'all.
Well, that's a great question.
What about you, Jesse? You know about the combiners, right?
I just brought up a list. Just to look at which ones I recognize and which ones I don't. Let's just say there's a lot that I don't. But yeah, Devastator. Purple and green. Okay, I'll just go by the colors. That looks badass when they come together. Devastator's badass. Piranha-Con. I just brought that up, and that is interesting. Let me get back.
Anyhow, point being, boy, do we love the combiners.
Now, Prime's visions continue to show worlds being drained of life. This is going on throughout these 3 issues. As events of the Swarm grow closer, Prime begins to feel that the visions the Matrix continue to give him appear to have started to become true. Now, he's pretty much believed these were going to happen since the beginning, but I wanted to make sure to get that out there, that these visions have continued throughout these issues. The Swarm is coming, ladies and gentlemen. It is on its way. And how could I didn't forget, but I can't leave out. Starscream is continuously worried about his role in Megatron's League of Decepticons and begins to wonder about what to do in case Megatron has no use for him.
Well, after the battle, Starscream is Darry's favorite. So I need to say that right off. And let me say, number 1, Starscream's always going to Starscream.
Yeah.
Number 2, I love Thundercracker. What a great name. I like how Thundercracker's always like, shut up, Starscream. Let's just get this done. Number 3, Darry, I've been waiting since our last one to ask you, Starscream, how do you justify this behavior in G2? Wow. Obviously, he goes way off, but here he's already contemplating overthrowing Megatron for what? Nothing's happened.
But that's the thing. The reason I love Starscream so much is he's like a Batman villain. He's pathologically obsessed with this thing that's always going to be his downfall. In this case, it's I have to betray Megatron, even if it's not in his own interest, even if he knows he's going to die as a result. He almost can't help himself. He's not even just Iago. He's he should be in Arkham screaming at the bars and being let me out so I can betray the Lord of the Decepticons, the master of evil, if you will. So I love it because it's almost you can't get out of your own way. And what did Megatron do? He resurrected you. He could have resurrected 1 million loyal Decepticon soldiers he's had in his time during the Great War, and he resurrects Starscream. These two need each other. Megatron doesn't feel like he's accomplished anything unless someone is telling him how great it is, even if they don't mean it. And Starscream doesn't get up in the morning if he doesn't have someone to betray,
Yeah. I just want to point out that my boy Soundwave was the only one who could ask Megatron that and not get in trouble. All right, sorry, just I didn't mean to interrupt, but we're talking about Starscream. I had to get that in.
I think that's fine. That's fine. Because that absolutely ties in with what's happening here. Starscream he's worried about his role with Megatron, and then the next thing you know, by the end of issue 9, after the battle on Ethos, Jyaxus is reflecting on his away team's defeat at the hands of what he believes was the Autobots, and gets a surprise visit from none other than Starscream, who offers his help to deliver both Megatron and Optimus Prime. By the end of the 9th issue, while Prime and Megatron are researching what was left by the Swarm, Jyaxus sends his forces to attack them on Earth. So, I wonder who did that. I think they figure it out by issue 10. But I did have one more little side note, and you guys feel free to jump in. I should have done this the whole time we did these episodes, but Skullgrin, Run Amok, and Smokescreen all meet their end in these 3 issues. Skullgrin, I believe, explodes in midair. Run Amok and Smokescreen, I think, get destroyed. And then, so keeping a tally of the deaths, that's what I've got so far in these first 3 issues. So, okay, I'm going to throw it to you guys real quick, but just one quick talking point for the first issue that we read. Megatron gets his butt handed to him. Anybody have any thoughts on that? I'll start with Dean. Dean, you got some thoughts on Megatron being, I wouldn't say he wasn't put in a camel clutch and humbled, because he certainly wasn't humbled.
That's not possible. And that's the thing. Megatron is never actually beaten. He is only momentarily pushed back. That's what he would tell you. He would tell you, because it's weird, as over the top and as full of himself as Megatron fucking is, he's not so dumb. He's not so full of himself as to be so dumb as to be like, there's no place in war or in improvement for defeat. Megatron's lost a lot. Like he could tell you about the days of the gladiator pit. He would tell you about when he was downtrodden. He wouldn't be this great if he hadn't been trampled upon so many times. So it is interesting to see Jaxus get over on in like such a one-sided fight or whatever. It's also, I'm not surprised because I think that Megatron sometimes, like I just said, even if he does learn from defeat, he does overestimate himself. And I feel like he also has made the mistake of he's very familiar with like 3 opponents. He's really like, and I think Optimus Prime has the same problem. Think about a baseball team or a football team. Which teams are they the best at scouting? Do they know what they're going to do? It's the teams in their division. They play them the most. They know that the coaches stay the same. The plays tend to stay the same. When somebody new comes in, you learn it again. But after a year or two, you kind of got it down. I feel like Megatron suffers from that. And every time you try and see him ever attack anybody outside of the Autobots, it doesn't go well for him because he's too used to trying to think like Optimus Prime. And so, he tries to outsmart Prime instead of the opponent at hand, kind of like Vince McMahon trying to do anything besides wrestling. It just doesn't work. So I think this was the right way to go. When he does team up with somebody, Prime or somebody, works with the other Decepticons, works great for him. And I think that's what that's what you want from Megatron at some point, because as evil as he is and as headstrong as he is, I like that he's a great leader, and a great leader eventually overcomes adversity by working with the people that they have to overcome that obstacle.
I was very conflicted because, we had just come out of the G.I. Joe story that was basically about like, hey, Megatron's got a great new body, go out, buy this toy, he's got this fancy rail gun that Dr. Bigglesworth made for him. And then here he gets knocked out pretty quickly by Jaxus, who's a new character. It's like, hey, we got to show how strong the new guy is. But it was worth it for the last page. And for those of you who don't have it in front of you, it's just this beaten down, really disheveled looking, wires and springs coming out everywhere. Megatron saying, I'm back, I'm here, I have to defeat this guy. And to me, I like that because it's like, oh, okay, now if they're going to team up, it's going to kind of make sense because, Megatron takes everything so personally. And it's like this upstart who dared, at least at one point, to call himself a Decepticon, this G-Axis guy, I got to kill him. I got to take him out. And if it means leading the Autobots to their victory, fine. I have to take this guy out. So
Optimus
it really
Prime is an asshole, but he's our asshole.
Yeah,
exactly.
Exactly.
I mean, and I'm not going to, and I'm not, this motherfucker is not going to show up and throw everything off. Once again, let me also point out, my boy Soundwave is the one who's like, we're going to keep looking for Megatron until we find out if he exists or not. Shut the fuck up, everybody. I honestly just love that about Soundwave. Like, I just love, and here's the thing, Soundwave would take over the Decepticons in a heartbeat, but he also recognizes that within the hierarchy that there is, it behooves him to do the quote unquote right thing. But when his moment arises, like we saw in the movie, he's not afraid to seize it.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, tell me about Darkwing there, Dean. I mean, this is he gets a whole page where he's lighting shit up. When you're in trouble, you call DW. I mean, it's Darkwing.
At the time, Darkwing hadn't really been used a lot. I think he's like paired up with somebody else a lot, and I forget the name off the top of my head. But I know they had redone him. It's a great toy. It's it might be the best G2 toy that they made. It's got like a firing Gatling gun style thing, like you kind of saw in the G.I. Joe vehicles at the time. It looks great. It's got a great color scheme. I think the reason I shared the page is I'm like, it's badass. I like Darkwing, and also I think maybe with the exception of the Megatron, arrives to get Prime's help. It's the best page in the series. Like it's just magnificent to me. The missiles are raining down, and they're saying, "Here comes death. Here comes Darkwing," and you really expect to get to see him some more, and really do a whole lot more. You don't see him a ton more than I recall, but I love that page, and it's like I said, it strikes me every time I do a reread. I'm like, oh yeah, here's this badass Darkwing, and I remember wanting the toy at the time too, and I saw it in the Sears Wish book. I'm very old, so I remember the Sears Wish books. I could not get my parents to order it for me. Maybe I'll buy one when I get off of here. I buy whatever I want these days. It's possible.
It's funny. I also love that page with Darkwing. And it's not even just that page. The couple of pages before it, introduced a couple of other Generation 2 toys, and it kind of shows off their battle features. And it was funny.
Right.
Yeah. It was great because, we're reading this in the 2020s, but back in the day, it's like these things were on stands. And at the end of the day, it's like, well, we got to sell these toys. So it's like in the middle of this giant cosmic space opera, it's like Darkwing, and
it's a commercial.
Yeah. It's like, go buy these toys, kids. And like to Dean's point, I don't think any of these characters show up in the rest of the story. They certainly don't have a major role. So it was like, it might be a later day Transformers comic. It's still a Transformers comic. It's still selling me toys.
Mm-hmm. I think it's interesting too that that's in there because it's hard for me to believe at this point that this comic book was aimed at an audience that they would think would be buying these toys. These toys were probably aimed at like 10-year-olds. This comic is an incredible, like not that there's anything in here that a 10-year-old couldn't handle, but there's a lot of concepts that would go over their head. There's a lot of stuff that may be a little too violent. I mean, a lot of like I think during these 3 issues, like several Autobots just like die, like trying to hold a perimeter and stuff.
Yeah.
So it's funny to see like, hey, we got to get these toy ads in here for the for a demographic that's reading who is not the demographic who we think will buy the toys.
Yeah.
Right after the page of Darkwing, I mean, there is one of the denizens of what was the name of it? Not Ethos, but the moon that the Decepticons are on, and they're raiding and trying to get this gas. This poor guy wants to surrender, and Megatron just straight up blasts him and kills him like right there. And you're just like, yeah, well, 10-year-olds enjoy. That guy got destroyed.
The only thing I wanted to say, and I'm sure this isn't the first time, but like reading this, I just love the teeth. Like it was just something that jumped out at me. Like normally I don't, I'm sure they do, but I don't think of the Transformers as like really having teeth. But like in the whole fight between like Megatron and G-Axis, they have these really like over accentuated faces and stuff. And it was just one of those things where I was like, yeah, it's still absolutely a Transformers comic, no questions asked. But it just looks like just like two boxers like going at it. And again, it was just like, oh yeah, we're really reaching the end of the line here, and it kind of feels like that.
Dude, yeah, when like Optimus's face gets knocked off.
Yeah.
You're like, I didn't know there were teeth under your mask, I guess.
Yeah.
I thought that was your mouth.
When Megatron shows up to talk to Optimus Prime, he's missing teeth. Yeah. I mean, it's gruesome, and there's all sorts of like, they almost look like rabid dogs at some point because they've got either it's drool coming out of their mouth, and it's far from what you would expect a robot to look like. Is Megatron getting some type of like new powers or something like that?
You're right. He's got this like weird glow around his hands. It's all this like Kirby crackle, but none of the other characters really seem to be acknowledging it.
It never happens. And as far as I know, it never happens again. Okay, so he says, I still don't really know all that this new, though admittedly somewhat tarnished body form is capable of, especially in the pain department. And it looks like he has like some type of crazy powers that I assume must have happened when he changed form then in the
That's what it is. He's referring to the new body that Cobra helped him make that he's got, right? Like I remember that now. That's what I thought he meant. Like he's not the gun anymore. He's the tank now.
There's a thing in issue 7 as well. Again, this is stuff that's probably happened in the continuity prior to it, but Prime is remembering or reflecting on his encounters with Megatron in the past, all the battles that they have done. There is specifically a couple panels dedicated to something that looks like two Transformers melted together. Please, someone step in and tell me what the heck that's about.
I can't remember exactly what now because I haven't read this in like 6 years, but at some point, and I think it's around issue 65, 60, Megatron and Ratchet get like fused together. And like they wind up leading this tortured existence. I remember it's a very like it's almost like a too bad relationship. Okay. Like they don't get along. They're always trying to pull each other in different directions. Darry, you might have read it since I read it because I don't remember how it gets resolved. But at some point they get split. But like it was like an ongoing issue a subplot in the issues for around at least 8 or 10 issues.
Yeah, I remember that Megatron and Ratchet got combined. It was a very famous cover at the time because it was just so gruesome looking.
It is gruesome.
Yeah, again, it's not something you think of with these like mechanical creatures because it almost looks like they've been organically fused. I actually didn't think it had been resolved. I thought that was the point of having the panels here, of them saying like, oh, somehow you must have gotten free. But again, I could be misremembering it. I haven't read that.
I could be too. I haven't read it in 6 years, so I don't remember. And when I say resolved, it might just mean blown up because by the last few issues of Transformers, it's not an issue. When you read 80, like that's not in it. That's not part of it. Bludgeon's the leader of the Decepticons, etc. So when I say resolved, I don't mean they got split or anything. Like, I guess the only other two things I want to say is, number one, we see Skullgrin in this, and I just want to remind everyone he's a pretender. What the hell is he pretending to be? Like, where is he blending in? Like the cantina from Star Wars? Like, what is this? Like, there's nowhere on Earth he's going to blend in. And number two, for whatever reason in the toys, Darkwing is Dreadwing.
Yeah.
And if you haven't seen them, you should check out the Transformers Generation 2 commercials. They have some of the best bad raps you have ever heard in your life. Like, they are terrible. They are saturated with old white dudes, like me now, sitting around in a room and being like, oh yeah, rap for the kid. That's what the kids want. And Dreadwings is one of the most notorious. So check that out if you haven't. They're all on YouTube. They're a lot of fun.
Jet formation!
Jet transformation!
The aerial bots are taking their shot. Lovable plastic Combaticons. They can all change and be rearranged. To form a super robot, Superion. The Combaticons are warring. Onslaught is roaring. Here's one metamorph in Dunigus. They all combine to keep Superions behind as a big bad battle in Bruticus.
That was brutal!
No! That was Bruticus!
Transformers Generation 2 aerial bots and Combaticons, each sold separately.
The only other thing I wanted to point out, you kind of mentioned this before, is very few of the Cybertronians, G-Axis' forces, actually get spelled out and given a personality, which is kind of unusual because all the Autobots and Decepticons have unique personalities and roles and toys and whatnot. And, that's kind of a theme with G-Axis' forces, which I like because they even all have the same color. They have this like white and this kind of like muted green, and it's kind of a way of showing like the Decepticons and the Autobots, they are individuals and they're choosing to have this fight, and they berate each other, and not everyone follows everyone else blindly, but with G-Axis, they're facing someone who has absolute dark side level control over his nearly unlimited forces. And I thought that was a cool visual way of saying, hey, you're not fighting a new faction of Decepticons with people you're going to be able to barter with. These are soldiers, and they're fascists, and they follow G-Axis, and you have a fight ahead of you. And we don't know what this swarm thing is, but that might be the wild card that saves the day, because otherwise these guys are going to just march right over you. They do not, they do not concern themselves with the interpersonal dealings that you guys do. And I thought that was a good visual cue in a book that is, for the time, surprisingly consistent in its visuals.
Yeah, and think about this. They all transform into the same things. All the ships look the same. All the land vehicles look the same. And yeah, what you said is spot on. That's a fascist society. It is an inherently fascist society, to the point where they keep talking about how G-Axis used to be this worst tyrant. He still seems god-awful now. Like terrible. Yeah. Like he still seems bad. Megatron is a totalitarian, but not necessarily a fascist. There's a lot of room for individuality within the Decepticons. There's a lot of room for back talk if you have earned that right, if you're Shockwave or Soundwave or even Starscream. Jetfire, when he's a Decepticon, is allowed to mouth off a little bit. If you lead a subgroup, like, the Stunticons do whatever the fuck they want. The Terracons do whatever they want. You mentioned the Seacons, they're like, we might help you. The Insecticons, the ultimate wild card. And Megatron doesn't just go destroy them. He's like, well, listen, yeah, the Insecticons sometimes don't follow my orders exactly, but when they're useful to me, and I'll need them. He's a totalitarian, but not necessarily a fascist. Although he's certainly genocidal, at different times. But I don't know that he would qualify his political beliefs or his philosophy and stuff. G-Axis and those Cybertronians, the new Decepticons, they're just out and out fascists. And I enjoy, like what you said, by displaying that schism so well, you find it's easier to cheer for the Decepticons when they team with the Autobots, and it's easier to, quote unquote, forgive the Autobots for teaming up with them.
All right, well, getting into issues 10 through 12 as we close in on the end here. As G-Axis attacks Auto Base. Megatron and Optimus realize they have been betrayed by Starscream. Dun, dun,
Who'd have
dun.
thunk it?
And at this time, out in space, Warworld, we mentioned that earlier, the ship Megatron that kind of got from Bludgeon is using for his troops, is boarded by Starscream, and he heads for the great source of power that is the Matrix. And if you'll recall, at the end, it was our last podcast, Megatron ripped the Matrix straight out of Optimus Prime, and it's sitting there on Warworld right now. So on Earth, Prime and Megatron's forces are resisting the attack. So Jihaxis, I'm gonna pronounce it 9 different ways tonight. Jihaxis sends in a second wave. During the fray, Megatron and Prime realize Starscream's on board Warworld, and they head to space to stop him. En route, Prime and Megatron watch as Warworld opens fire on a score of Jihaxis' ships, and they wonder who could be behind it as they board the ship. Walking through its halls, Prime and Megatron realize the ship is alive and soon see it is Starscream, who has come in possession of the Matrix and is now one with Warworld. Starscream revels in his new power and decides to make Megatron and Prime suffer for their past indignations. Jihaxis is mad he's lost the Warworld and plans to head there and sort things out himself. Prime and Megatron work together, which was fun to see, to try to escape Starscream's torture, and are given an opening when Warworld begins to shake. Meanwhile, in deeper space, a few of Jihaxis' ships are heading towards the battle but encounter the Swarm and are immediately destroyed. The Swarm is heading towards Earth. Prime finds the control center of Warworld and reaches out to Jihaxis to warn him of the coming threat and attempt to reason with him. Jihaxis' response? They attack Earth and obliterate San Francisco. Surprisingly, compelled by the Matrix, Starscream unleashes Warworld on Jihaxis to protect Earth. Prime realizes that the Matrix is changing Starscream's evil ways, but then realizes the threat from his visions has arrived. The Swarm is here. Jihaxis believes the Swarm is an Autobot trick and decides to fire on it. During all of this, Prime convinces Starscream to give him the Matrix. Prime then boards a transport and heads towards Jihaxis' ship. Coming up with a plan, Megatron compels Starscream, I say compel, put that in quotes as he drags him, compels Starscream to join him to gather the reanimum gas that they gathered off Tychos, or whatever the name of that place was, which will apparently make their metal shells super dense. I was pleased that this came back into play, that they actually used this, which was pretty cool. But it's going to make their metal shell super dense in order to battle the Swarm. Prime finally finds Jihaxis, but is immediately met with a fist to the face, and now he can't talk. As Jihaxis relentlessly beats upon Prime, he is about to crush his head, as we've seen him do with a lot of his troops. It's pretty gruesome.
He's really into that.
Oh, yeah.
He definitely loved Crush in the early 90s with the crazy WWF.
As Jihaxis relentlessly beats upon Prime, he is about to crush his head when the Swarm breaks through the hull of the ship and obliterates a defiant Jihaxis. As the ship breaks apart, Optimus is blown into space and he awaits his fate. But when Prime awakens at the foot of Starscream, he is struck with a revelation that the sentient Swarm is lacking a purpose and just attacking out of instinct, very much like a child. On Earth, Autobot and Decepticon work together to solidify a defense against the Swarm. When it attacks, they hope their shields will hold. Now, I listed this because it was pretty crazy. Frenzy is using his sonic blast to attack the Swarm, but to no avail. Transformers are dying left and right when Megatron shows up, giving Grimlock, these two guys have butted head plenty of times, Grimlock the reanimum gas to help them withstand the Swarm. On Warworld, Starscream gives Prime some reanimum as well, but Optimus believes he must die in order for his plan to work. Prime is ripped apart by the Swarm and dies, but the Matrix keeps his essence alive, uniting him with the Swarm, allowing him to bestow upon it the dream of Primus. Now, I put that in quotes because that's a thing, and we're going to talk about that. The Swarm transfers the dream to the Cybertronians left on Earth as well, and departs, leaving Optimus Prime standing before them. Prime gives a rousing speech to follow in the footsteps of Primus, devoting their existence to the good that lies within them for all of creation. Now, in a small epilogue, in the outer reaches of space, in a place called the Hub, the progenitor of the Decepticons, Liege Maximo, is being briefed by a member of Jihaxis' army, the Decepticon Rook. After hearing the fate of Jahaxus, Liege Maximo plans on bringing a reckoning to Prime and Megatron's alliance. Whew, that was a long couple paragraphs there, but we made it to the end of Transformers Generation 2. Darry, I'm going to give you, let's just start off with this. Starscream, go.
You have to defend him. He's your guy.
I love defending him. I will speak all day and night about Starscream. I thought this was a great use of the character. I don't know if I'm reading too much into this, but there was an earlier story from the original comic where something similar happens and Starscream gets godlike power by possessing a weapon, a MacGuffin called Underbase.
Yeah.
And it's a similar story where he gets his godlike power and he never learns. And, it's this idea. It's like Thanos. I know I mentioned him in the last episode, but it's like you get godlike power and you don't know what to do with it. You have no imagination and you eventually end up losing it. So I love.
He got all that power and all he could think of to do was kill Omega Supreme.
But no, I liked it because I like that for all of the characters that are introduced in Transformers media, he is one that writers keep finding something to do with him. They don't have him in this story because he can turn into a fighter jet or because he's standing next to Megatron. They turn into him because it's like, well, we need someone to be at the center of this who can come to a realization. And Starscream always has the most real estate to gain. So him with the Matrix, it's like, wow, that's a huge change. We're all big comic book nerds here, and it made me think of Lex Luthor in All-Star Superman by Grant Morrison and Frank Quitely. Spoilers for a pretty old comic, but at the end, Lex realizes he's been wrong all these years because if you can see things the way Superman does, we're all in it together. And I had a similar vibe here with Starscream, where it's like, oh yeah, once you have all this power and you're connected to the Matrix, you see that like there's something bigger than just your petty insecurities, which I greatly enjoyed.
Dean, what do you think about Starscream, buddy?
Well, I think he's a whiny piece of trash. But like, that's why you like him. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. I mean, the thing is like if he wasn't, it wouldn't be great. He's one of the most important Transformers, and part of it is just because of what Darry said. Like, he has the most to learn. He always has the most to gain, and then the most to lose. You always know what's going to happen. I enjoy the He-Man She-Ra Christmas special feel. You remember that meme where Skeletor's like, I don't like to feel good. I like to feel evil. That's how Starscream came across. He's like, Prime, I don't want to be a hero. I need to be self-serving. What are you doing, Prime? How do I possibly not help these people? And of course, it's as simple. And this is the thing with Starscream. It's as simple as letting go of the power. All he had to do was be like, I don't want the Matrix anymore. You know what I mean? But like, I found that to be very enjoyable. It's really good. It's really good to see Starscream, for all the reasons Darry said. And also, even though he discounted it, he does transform into a big old jet. He does fire super lasers, and that is cool.
Yeah, for sure. Darry, tell me, has an alliance between Decepticons and Autobots been done before? Again, I'm the casual fan sitting over here. Tell me, does that happen in the movie? I can't remember. It's been a while. Decepticons and Autobots team up to go up against Unicron, right? Because I think that's mentioned in the comic.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. As the one I always go back to. I know it's a cliche because like everyone loves it, but the original Transformers from '86, it's like in that one they all have to kind of put aside their differences. But it's funny too in that one. In that movie we talk about Generation 2 being a bloodbath. That's the original bloodbath. All the characters whose toys weren't going to be on shelves next season are knocked off. So there's not too many characters at the end of the movie to stand against Unicron, and there's the Deus Ex Machina and the Matrix of Leadership. But it's funny here to watch them actually have to put aside very real differences and go up against him. One of the things in the movie that I loved as a kid, but now I almost see as like a cop-out is like, they make Megatron work for Unicron. So at the end of the day, it's still, Optimus's heir with the Matrix, Rodimus Prime, facing off against a new version of Megatron. They don't really fight together against Unicron, but they do here, which I really like because it's like, can I trust Megatron? Can I trust my age-old enemy? Like, is he going to risk the ending of our entire race just to take me out, seconds or microcycles before he does everything else? So while the other times it's done it, that's been great. I really think that Furman kind of perfected it here by saying, I'm going to introduce a third party that you guys just can't empathize with. And I'm going to show you how these characters can work when they actually are in the same boat. So, of all the times they've done it, I definitely think this is probably my favorite.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think this might be the best of them, although I am partial also to what you mentioned before, Transformers Volume 1, number 50, with the Underbase saga, where the Decepticons and the Autobots team up. I can't recall exactly how it worked, but I want to say Ratchet and Megatron worked together to get rid of Shockwave in the early issues of Transformers comic book, which would later why it was such a big deal when they were combined, because they did not like each other then. They don't like each other less when they get combined. I don't think they ever like each other. There's no big team up then there. But other, like the Underbase saga and this are probably, for what I've read of the Transformers, which means not a lot since the year 2000, these are definitely the big Autobot Decepticon team ups that, that are really good, over the top, and you see those pairings that you want to see. Optimus Prime and Megatron back to back. Optimus Prime and Megatron helping each other through traps. Grimlock talking to Soundwave. That's just me. I like Grimlock and Soundwave, so that was fun. But yeah, that's what I do enjoy. I do enjoy that aspect of this. And there are, it's the movie, it's Underbase, it's this, and those are the big three team ups in my canonical sphere.
It's funny too, because before Dean mentioned the Megatron being a gladiator, which is something that was in the UK comics, but it comes back in a big deal later on when different properties decide that they want to make Megatron a bit more understanding, like not just this crazy supervillain. It's like, well, can we give him a compelling backstory? And one of the ones that's really taken off is this idea that Megatron is part of a persecuted lower class. And when he had his revolution, it wasn't just because he wanted powers, because he really did want a better life for those like him. And one of the things I really like here is seeing Optimus and Megatron together. It's like, oh yeah, in the next iteration, they're really going to run with this, of them saying, why can't we be on the same side again? We both want our people to be okay, in kind of a Professor X Magneto thing. So I did like seeing that here, because you really get to see, these guys have to look at each other in the eye and say, what do we fundamentally disagree on that's going to prevent us from working together? And you find out at the end of the day, it's like, nah, man, we all want to run Cybertron. You see at the end of issue 12, it's like, yeah, Cybertron's big enough for both of us. Calm down. We'll be okay.
Do we agree that Starscream sucked? I'm just teasing. Well, I also enjoy when it comes to those two. You see, like you said, the leadership that they both have. They both care for their troops, like I said, except for Starscream. I think Megatron doesn't want to sacrifice as few of his troops as possible. But I think the third really interesting leadership matrix here was Grimlock. Grimlock's in charge of the forces on Earth. He's he's so inspiring that Decepticons are just wanting to become Autobots. And at one point, I think one of the Predacons is mad about it and tries to kill one of the new Decepticons, and Grimlock takes him out. And he's like, "Hey, Autobots got to stick together, right?" And everybody's like, "Yeah, And I think it was interesting to get to see Grimlock evolve throughout these 12 issues from the guy who blamed himself for a bad operation, and Prime told him earlier, "Hey, you just didn't go far enough. You had to think a little bit more." And now you see him put all of that together. And at no point during the, as they try to hold off the swarm on Earth, waiting for Megatron to show up with the gas, does he falter? Does he waver? He's like, these guys are great troops. I'm glad to be leading them. I'm glad to be with them. And if we die, we die proud of each other. And that was a great little subplot that I think when I've heard other people talk about G2 gets overlooked a little bit, is that Grimlock really evolves into the leader that I think he always wanted to be and always could be.
Well, okay, so Jhaxus meets his end by the swarm. Was this the way you wanted to see Jhaxus die? So, Darry, did you have any thoughts on that? Was this the way it was supposed to go down? Is this the way you wanted to see it go down?
Yeah, it absolutely was. I'm in general a fan of any story that wraps up its plot line by showing that an act of creation is ultimately more powerful than an act of destruction. And knowing that Optimus, who's, pretty much my favorite superhero of all time, except for the Scarlet Spider, is able to defeat the villain by showing it compassion and empathy and saying, hey, listen, you, the swarm, you're our descendants, and you maybe don't have the proper context for the fact that doing this is bad. So let me connect you to the Matrix. Let me connect you to our creator. Let me show you what I've experienced in my lifetime. And they turn it around and they're like, oh, this is cool. We're going to take out him because he's a bad deal. I really like that. I thought it landed. I thought it was a beautiful beautiful way to end this story and what ultimately proved to be the entire Marvel Transformers franchise. But then on top of that, you get to the last page of issue 12, and it's like, wow, what a cliffhanger.
Mm-hmm.
What an amazing cliffhanger. And I just, as a fan of comics and the monthly format, it's like, Simon Furman knows what he's doing with these pages.
Yeah, Liege Maximo, I think, was mentioned, in the first 6, like maybe once or twice, and then completely dropped. Am I right? I call him the progenitor of the Decepticons.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, my understanding from reading about the character is that, you were right. The earlier part of this series talks about how, there was a the first generation 1, if you will, of Transformers that Primus made. And the idea is that, the evil sect, the darker sect, came and descended from Liege Maximo. He's the original Decepticon. He's very similar to a character that would be introduced after this by Simon Furman called the Fallen, who was actually in the movies too. I think one of them is named after him. So this concept of the progenitor, as you call him, the original Decepticon, I really feel like it's a fundamental addition to the mythology. And it just lands here on the last page, and it's like, oh man, I don't know if Simon Furman thought this book was going to come back or what, but you hooked me. I want to know more about that guy.
No kidding. Dean, what's your thoughts on these last 3 issues, man? You have the floor.
Well, first off, I want to say that Jazz is my favorite Autobot, and all I get out of Jazz in these last 3 issues is at one point, Cinder's like, "Hey, Jazz, you're doing stuff." He's like, "I am." That's it. That's the exchange that there is. I think the last 3 issues are really good. I think that G-Axis getting eaten by the Swarm really resonates for me, not just for the reasons that Darry said, but also because I think it's no secret I'm an ardent anti-fascist, and I hate fascists more than I hate anything in the world. And so G-Axis is fairly epitomizes the fascist mentality. And one of the things that they're really into is might makes right. They can do anything they want because they're so big, so tough, and only the strong and the tough can survive, etc. They get to push around anybody else. Well, Jackson comes up against the Swarm, and it doesn't matter how big his Ray Blaster is, or how good his Metallicato may be, or how hard he punches. Swarm's just going to eat him. It doesn't matter. And that's a great analogy for real world fascism, because those values and those sets of ethics eat people alive, and they eat society alive until it eats itself out and somebody just gets rid of it. So I really enjoyed seeing that in these last 3 issues. I think the cliffhanger was good. I think I knew by the time I read it, because I was reading this in real time. I think I knew by issue 8 or 9 it was going to get canceled. So I wasn't like, oh man, where's issue 13? Too bad, bro. Really liked the Raiders of the Lost Ark feeling of Optimus Prime and Megatron together trying to survive Starscream's war world. I thought that was pretty cool. I love the Autobots and Decepticons on Earth making their last stand. I'm a sucker for the last stand stuff. I'm a sucker for, bad guys and good guys having to get along against a greater enemy, and especially when they're pressed into close quarters. I will say, though, once again, here's San Francisco getting nuked, and Grimlock's they dropped a big one. So I appreciate that he knows what to call an atomic bomb. But again, if this takes place in the G.I. Joe continuity, it has no impact on anything. At some point, it must have split off, because wow, they just they nuke San Francisco. I think they blow up some other cities, and nothing ever comes back in the G.I. Joe issues in its own series, or even it's really not mentioned a whole lot here. Where are the Joes at this point? They were around earlier.
Yeah, no kidding. I was thinking the same thing. I was like, man, this is a big deal. San Francisco's no longer there. We might have to address this at some point in some continuity, I would imagine.
Yeah, somebody send up Countdown in the Defiant. What are we doing here?
It just goes to, again, support the evil that G-Axis is, that basically consumes him. Instead of wanting to face Prime one-on-one, he's like, what can I do that'll hurt him? It's hurt humanity. You can see the look on Prime's face that he couldn't believe that he did that. I felt the emotion of that moment as he's sitting there watching the view screens, and there's skeletal remains on the TV screen. It's pretty crazy, but
you'll notice too, it's the same move Bludgeon made. It's the exact same move Bludgeon made 5 issues with him. I'll just attack Earth to deal with Optimus Prime. So it's kind of weird for 2 people, because Jaxus wanted to tell you he was this noble guy, and Bludgeon was like, I love Metallicato, the noble warrior. It's pretty a cowardly move for some people who purport to be very noble warriors and leaders.
Yeah, poor San Francisco, and it's so random too because it's literally, an alien robot overlord being like, no, destroy a major city, whatever happens to be under us. It's not like San Francisco has a particularly strong impact with the Transformers. So it's funny. It's just like, oh man, we're gonna nuke this whole city, and then there's not a lot of real estate left, but it doesn't come back in any way. It's like every time I read this, I have to remind myself, like, oh yeah, they killed a couple of million people.
Right.
So that jumped out at me, but it was funny too because not only is it a very like 90s thing to do where it's like, oh man, we're gonna nuke a city. It's like, yeah, okay, that feels accurate. But also it's funny too because it kind of drives Optimus. It does work, right? Like he originally led his people to this planet because he was trying to save them. So he brought the war here. I mean, Earth is not part of the interstellar community. They might have never known about a Decepticon. He brought them here. So yeah, attacking them, it's like, that's a really good Achilles heel. It's like, what does Darkseid say to Superman in the animated series? If I had known hurting one of the humans would hurt you so much, I would have killed more of them. It's this idea of like, you might be invulnerable. You might always come back from the dead, but those in your charge will not. And I'll take as many of them as I can because you keep defeating me. So I thought it was a great move. I thought it was a way of saying, this is Optimus Prime. He's a three-dimensional character, even if he just transforms into a random tractor trailer. The other thing I'll say, just because I'm a huge nerd, is one of the things I really like about this, the Swarm seems like they're going to be a big deal, and if there had been an issue 13 and forward, they probably would have. But they were actually supposed to make a return in the most unlikely of places. They were supposed to be in the Beast Wars cartoon. Yeah, I don't know if you guys watched the entire thing, but towards the end, a random alien race is shown to be kind of the behind-the-scenes people of a lot of the events there. And without getting too into the weeds, I had read an interview where the writer wanted to connect them to this concept, which they very much liked, and they wanted to go from A to B with. But unfortunately, that was left on the cutting room floor. But I like to read this issue thinking like, oh, you know what? You learned from Optimus and you went on. You did help his. So that's kind of my headcanon.
I never watched Beast Wars, so I can't talk a lot about that. But maybe you know more about this because a lot of my stuff dies off. Like my Transformers knowledge dies off immediately after this. Just bits and pieces here and there. But from what I understand, for a long time with like Hasbro and future entities that would license the Transformers, IDW, Dreamwave, etc., they didn't really want to talk about Generation 2. It's not that I don't think they were embarrassed by it, but there's it's not really something we would care to revisit. I know. Do you think that had anything to do with the Beast Wars, not picking that up, or was it just something else? Because I know that's a fact because I've read that in several different places where they were like, yeah, I tried to bring this back up from G2. They didn't want to do it for a while. I know that's changed since, but for a while they didn't really want to mention this series a lot.
Yeah, no, it's 100%. Generation 2 is the awkward teenage years of this franchise. I mean, when Dreamwave very famously brought the characters back in the early 2000s, they went straight for Generation 1. You had Soundwave, Devastator, Optimus Prime. Right. There was no attempt to bring back any of these retrofitted or revolved versions. It was pure 80s nostalgia, and it worked. And the movie has gone in the movie series has gone in a similar direction. Right. The few concepts introduced in Generation 2 really, unfortunately, don't get a lot of play unless Simon Furman himself wants to wrap up a couple of the storylines. But to your point, that is changing now that there's just so much media. I have not read as much of the IDW stuff as I probably should have just because there's so much of it. Right. But I know a lot of these characters do show up. So it's that idea of now enough time has passed, another 20 years has passed, where it's oh yeah, we have nostalgia for the 90s. Beast Wars itself is 25 years old this year, but this other stuff that bridged the gap between one person's very popular franchise and another one, it's oh, there was something there, and let's play around with it. So yeah, I definitely think if you really like these characters, there's some places in the IDW stuff. But yeah, for a long time, Generation 2 was just, it was your emo phase. It was I'm happy that I didn't have social media when I was in middle school. That's what Generation 2 is, man. People wanted to move on. They wanted to remember the good times. They wanted to sell you monkeys and dinosaurs.
Listen, I had a good time reading this series. I would have never picked it up if it weren't for, I guess, really our first Unspoken issues on issue 80, talking about that final issue of Transformers. Dean saying, I think Dean mentioned it at that point. He's at some point we got to do Generation 2.
I did,
and I enjoyed what I read here. I was dropped into a world that I wasn't completely familiar with, but was familiar enough to where I could pick pick up very quickly on what was going on. And then this whole new story just kind of spun out of what I was used to. And Simon Furman did a great job of keeping me hooked and keeping me interested. And I'll tell you, these last 6 really flew by for me. Like the first 6 issues of this series, I was getting into it. I was learning a lot, but then I was really invested in reading at a very quick pace in these last 6 issues. I wanted to see how this was going to go down. I wanted to see how Jhaxus was going to get his butt whooped. I wanted to see how Prime was going to reconcile what happened here. I mean, I mentioned the dream of Primus. Dean, can you give me an idea of what the dream of Primus is? Am I coining the term right there first off? Is it called the dream of Primus?
They refer to it, and I think it's just another way to say till all are one. I think that's the way I interpreted it, which is what which is kind of the driving mantra of the trends. At some point, they'd like to not have the schism and, just be Transformers, not Autobots or Decepticons. And it's all about which side would win out. Primus wants the good side to win out. That's the way I understand it, Darry. If you understand it differently, let me know.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. One of the things that I always found very interesting about, Simon Furman's take on the Transformers, which again accounts for a lot of the comic media, is it's very much the story of Primus is good and what he makes is good, and Unicron is bad, and that's why he eats and destroys and unmakes things. And one of the ideas prevalent here is the Transformers, particularly the Autobots, the descendants of Primus, they're not just there to do things and to have a life. They're there to be good. They're there to be noble. They're there to help. They're basically immortal. They're very strong. They adapt. They can become part of any culture. I really do think Furman is saying, well, listen, Primus is a sentient, somewhat compassionate God. And he made these things so they can go out into the galaxy and they can help where they can. They just keep getting distracted by all these evil forces that keep popping up. So to me, when I read that, especially here in the 11th hour, it's like Primus would like it if his creations could help everyone. And maybe now that they've put a bunch of nonsense aside and made peace with one branch of their evolutionary tree, they can get on that. They can help people. They can do things. They can make a difference. That's kind of how I read it. But yeah, I do like the way Dean said it, which is, till all are one. Everyone's got to come together. Everyone's got to work together. You all got to be part of the Matrix, part of the Spark. So I like that as well.
Final thoughts there, Dean. Let's hear it.
I think that you'd be hard-pressed to find a more fun romp than Transformers Generation 2, but also you'd be hard-pressed to find a more cosmically, mystically minded comic book about, super space robots that, turn into cars and jets and sometimes guns. I think that, the 12 issues really go together well. It's a great start to, story from start to end. I wish it could have gone on. I would have been interested to see the next few issues, what happens when the Swarm gets shown, the dream of the Liege Maximo, etc. It would be interesting to have seen it. As it is, I'm just really glad that we were able to get together and talk about it, because I think it's a very forgotten piece of Transformers lore. It's a very forgotten piece of Transformers history, and it's a very forgotten piece of 90s comics history. I think people forget that the Transformers comic, volume 1 stretched into the 90s, but also that there was a Transformers comic that just was all that was all, self-contained within the 90s, and that it had a different feel, and it felt very much within that time frame. Just as if you started reading Transformers in 1985, it felt very 1985. This feels very 1994, and I mean that in the best possible way. So it's good to, it's good to get out there. It also, reminded me of everything I love about the Transformers, both the heavy-minded, the more Adam Warlock out there stuff, but also just wow, Grimlock is a Tyrannosaurus Rex who is also metal, and he eats metal things, and I enjoy that. It's weird how it can both make me think so deeply, but also make me feel like I was 6 years old again.
All right, Darry, what's your final thoughts, man?
My last thought on this whole thing, and it just kills me as a comic book fan, is as far as I can tell, this has not been collected, at least in an easy to find way. I know a lot of these old Marvel books, the reprint rights aren't super clear, but I tell you, man, after reading this, and I had to break out my old issues, I would love if there were just a nice collected edition. Transformers, like I said before, still an evergreen property, new show on Netflix, movies coming out, toys on the shelves as we speak. It would be really nice to be able to buy this and put it in someone's hands and say, listen, I know you might think one way about Generation 2, but read this. Read this. It's a good comic, especially from the time it came out. It makes you think, and it's by veteran creators. It is certainly not a relaunch. It closes out a lot of stories. So I just wish IDW or whoever could put out just a nice, Spider-Man doesn't show up in this, just a nice bound edition of 12 issues. I'd love to have it on my bookshelf. I'd love to give it to people. I don't know if we'll ever get that, but that is my final hope.
I think, too, it's important to note, if you are going to read this, try and read it like it's its own continuity. I think one of the problems some people have with this is, like we've talked about, it doesn't connect neatly to the G.I. Joe issues it's tied into. It doesn't connect neatly, like some of the guys who show up in this, they died in the first Transformers. It doesn't connect neatly with some stuff that comes afterwards, like when they do Regeneration 1 and the new Generation 1 stuff. So read it as its own continuity, and I think it really, really stands up then.
All right, well, I guess that will bring our discussion of Transformers Generation 2 to a close. Dean, let's go ahead and lay it out there, man. What do we want to plug here tonight?
Well, I think everybody should transform and roll out to the UnspokenDecade.com, where you're going to read a lot of great articles about 90s comics, and, some of these podcasts are posted there, too.
Did someone say Unspoken Decade? The place where you need to go to check out some great articles about comics in the 90s? This would be a good time to plug a sponsor of the W2M network, and that is Grammarly. For you, the listeners of Unspoken Issues, Grammarly is offering a free download of the Grammarly software. Grammarly's AI-powered products help people communicate more effectively. Grammarly helps you write mistake-free on Gmail, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and nearly anywhere else you write on the web. Grammarly corrects hundreds of grammar, punctuation, and spelling mistakes while also catching contextual errors, improving your vocabulary, and suggesting style improvements. To download Grammarly today, go to getgrammarly.com/W2M network. Again, that's getgrammarly.com/W2M network to download Grammarly for free.
We're on Twitter at Unspoken Decade, where, I'm posting, 3 or 4, comics a day. Just getting to get them out there talking to people. And we're on Facebook, very active on Facebook. So look us up there until all are one. That's what I'm going to plug now.
Love it. Love it. Shout out to the W2M network, who is hosting the podcast, and of course the Radulich Broadcasting Network as well. For myself, Jesse Starcher, Darry Weight sitting right over there, and there's Dean Compton. We're heading on out of here. Have a good one. Bye-bye.